back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys! So I am here today to review kind of the rest of a series, I suppose, and that is this series, the Memory, Sorrow and Thorn series by Tad Williams. I've already reviewed the first, which you can see on my bookshelf just here, this yellowy one, and that is the Dragon Bone Chair, so I'll put a link to my review for that one down below. And I recently read the final three in that series: Stone of Farewell, this is book 2, To Green Angel Tower Part 1, Siege, which is book 3, and finally To Green Angel Tower Part 2, which is called Storm, and this is book number 4. Each of these books is over 800 pages long, and I read them all in the space of 1 month, which I'm quite proud of, I must say. First off, I think these editions are beautiful. I cannot help but sit and stare at them because they are just gorgeous editions. Secondly, I read this series, or the rest of this series, because the new one, which is called The Witchwood Crown and is set hundreds of years after this series, I think, just came out, and so I got sent that one and I wanted to read it, but I decided I was going to finish this series because it has been sat on my shelf for quite some time, and this was the push I needed to actually crack on and finish this. So I'm really happy that I did, and I'm going to hold up one at a time because it's really heavy. So the first one that I read was book 2, Stone of Farewell. This kind of gets back into the story quite slowly. This is a classic fantasy, so what I mean by that is it definitely follows in the same sort of vein as J.R.R. Tolkien. It follows the story of Simon, who is our chosen one. He is a kitchen boy in the first book who lives at the castle, and he discovers a very underhanded plot going on with the king, and he gets wrapped up in a lot of different magic and a lot of different conspiracies, has to flee the castle and ends up meeting a young troll, a nice troll, they're all kind of nice trolls in this, called Binnabic, and Binnabic and Simon end up being good companions who are journeying together to try and find some swords called Memory, Sorrow and Thorn, because these swords are supposed to be magical, and when you have them all then you can control the Storm King, who is the arch nemesis of the series. So that's the general plot. It's definitely playing into a lot of the tropes that Tolkien sets up in his books, like the Chosen One, like good versus evil, and it does have a variety of mythical races, including the Scythi, who are kind of fairy folk, and we have the trolls, who are very fun little dumpy fellows in my mind. I kind of imagine them that way. And we have a wolf, who is again another friend, companion to the group of travellers, so there's definitely a lot of themes within this that kind of make it a classic fantasy. The other thing I would say is that this is a very slow moving series, and I tend to find that often happens with classic fantasy because it focuses a lot on the world building and kind of the details of that world, so things are described in a lot of detail, and if you don't like that then you will not like this series, but if you do then you'll probably really enjoy it. I found that this book in particular focused on quite a few different characters, whereas the first book focused mainly on Simon, so I felt like this was broadening our approach to the world and the characters within. Simon remains definitely the main character throughout the entire series, but I do think that some of the other characters who are mentioned, such as Miriamel and Prince Joshua and Binnabic and Maegwyn, all become kind of more major players as the story goes on. But with that said, I do think the female characters in this are not the greatest. I would have liked to see a lot more action and a lot less moaning, and I feel like they were not done very well. So it is classic fantasy, and it was written a few years ago now, but I don't think the women are done that well. With that said, it is a fun adventure, and I did enjoy getting to know some of the women a bit more, because in the first book we really don't see an awful lot of them, and in this book I feel like we started to see their storylines open up and become a bit more individual and a bit more exciting and expansive, and I definitely found Miriamel's story to be the most boring in this one, but Mae Gwyn's story to be the most interesting, so I suppose they were two ends of a spectrum. Simon's story and Prince Joshua's story kind of end up coming into a parallel place by the end of this book, and we do see some of the Sithee getting involved as well later on, which I really enjoyed. And I do think that there are things that happen in this, but it is not an action-packed book by any means. It definitely takes its time plodding along, and it is mostly a setup for the conclusion, which happens in book 3 and book 4, which are both called The Green Angel Tower. So that's my review of that, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars as a whole. I then went on to book number 3, which is Siege, and this one is definitely a more action-packed book. Right from the start, I feel like you can tell you instantly get into the action a lot more, a lot quicker, and you already have the foundation with the characters and the world by this point, so you don't really need explanation about who they are and where they come from. We've already laid all the groundwork we could possibly lay by this point of the series, and so we're already getting into the plot and the action, and by this point we've seen quite a dramatic shift in the political stances of some of the characters. Some of the more major characters have aligned themselves with either the Mad King, who is supposedly being ruled over by the Storm King. We're not sure if he is or he isn't, but it seems like there are evil forces at work possibly controlling him rather than him controlling the Empire. He's actually the one being controlled. And we then have Prince Joshua, who is his brother, and he is the other force that Simon and some of our other characters have aligned themselves with to hopefully fight off the evil that is taking over the king and hopefully banish it into the darkness. So that's kind of the plot line of this one. I do feel like this is largely, again, set up for the final book, but it's a lot more action-packed than the first two because there are things that happen, there are characters who get introduced still, and there are characters whose storylines get a lot more fleshed out in this book. I definitely, again, felt very intrigued by Mae Gwyn's story in this, and also by Binnabic and Simon's, because I do feel like they get into a lot more adventures and scrapes in this story than they have in previous ones. I feel like the risk factor is kind of upped in this book, which is what I really liked about it. So I gave this one a 3.5. And then I went on to the final book in the series, which is called Storm. And this one was definitely the favourite of the series for me. I gave this a 4 stars. It was very, very solidly action-packed. It had a lot going on. It still retains that kind of slower pace than your average fantasy novel nowadays because it is classic. But I do think it was a lot more action-packed as a whole, and I do think there were a lot more moments within this that were very memorable, particularly in the battle scenes at the ending, the scenes that are set in the tower, the scenes that have dialogue between some of the characters kind of confronting one another and doing a whole standoff and argue rather than fighting, because that happens a lot in fantasy. But I really enjoyed it, and I definitely found myself smiling along. I definitely was rooting for the characters by this point because we know and we love them by this point. So I gave this one a 4 stars overall, and I did definitely enjoy it, and I do think the series gets a lot stronger as it goes, particularly ending on the 4-star note. So that is my review of the final 3 in the Memory, Sorrow and Thorn series by Tad Williams. I would love to know in the comments below if you've read any of Tad Williams' work. What have you read by him and what have you most enjoyed? So far I've read all of the Memory, Sorrow and Thorn series, and I've read all of the Otherland series, which is this kind of sci-fi and fantasy blended book series, and for me I prefer Otherland. Otherland just felt a bit more innovative to me, so I'll link my review for the Otherland series as well down below, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have read these books, do leave them in the comments for me to chat with you. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.